Watching every single Isekai anime was an exercise in pain. Hours of my life spent as if I had put the same episode on repeat, asking myself, why would anyone do this to themselves? But then there's a lingering thought that this little devil on my shoulder being like, do it. In the grand scheme of things, this will have no large impact on my life. It's just me following a whim to its end. I'm not gaining a useful skill or even a cheat skill, but sometimes you just gotta do the dumb thing just for the hell of it. Without further ado, let's get back into watching more Isekai anime. Where we last left off, I had watched 20 of all of the Isekai anime I could find on Crunchyroll. I thought about making this several parts, and you know, here we are. I didn't do that. It's just one big one. But that's also because it was the holidays and I had plenty of time to watch them. So while you were all celebrating Christmas, I was watching Isekai anime. Who really won here? I went into this second half with much lower expectations given how the last batch went and how many were just very hit or miss. There were a few winners, but 90% of them I had heard of once and just kind of went, meh. Anyway, here's the Master of Ragnarok and Einherjar, where the only notable thing about it is that they have some type of Yakuza family, but it's every female character calling the MC like Oni-sama or One, like any of those nicknames where it's just kind of weird. It's also used in the story to be like not quite slavery, but kind of just a really weird harem where the MC like conquers a nation, and instead of killing the leader like everyone else wants him to, he's like, and I'm like, I guess, I'm sure whoever has this fetish is feeling great right now. But I've just watched so many that I'm like, okay, whatever, dude. This is gonna leave my mind in about 30 seconds. And in a similar vein, Sengoku Nightblood will get lost in a sea of countless other series. Somehow, for the entire first video, I avoided touching any of the transported to feudal Japan Isekai anime, a whole separate category of Isekai that I feel like had its heyday and is kind of slowed down now. But it's probably just villainess Isekai at this point, because they're kind of vaguely correlated based on nothing besides like my own vibes, where they're kind of like the Isekai for women, where it's like a reverse harem. And I mean, both have a man trying to kill you, except one of them isn't Toyotomi Hideyoshi or Oda Nobunaga. Anyways, Sengoku Nightblood is just 20 minutes of hot men based on people from the Sengoku era. I applaud it for just being incredibly obvious that it is that. But that's boring. But you know, I'm happy for all the women, gay men, or the Japanese history fanatics, because I'm sure you're eating great from this one. I'm going to stick to watching my own historical anime. Now that's cinema. It's also close to a quarter of the episode. If you're in need of some like Bob Team Epic bits being run straight down mid, this is the show for you. Honestly, the OP and ED are worth it even if they were the funniest part of the episode. It's like 7 minutes long. It's not that much of a time sink. Extra Olympia Kicklows might be trying to get to the Olympics, but I should get a gold medal for having to sit through an episode of Conception. Conception, for reference, is one of the lowest rated anime on my anime list. I thought this was one of those, like, it's so bad that it could maybe be funny. It's not. It's just weird and uncomfortable. The opening scene is the main girl saying she's basically the next Virgin Mary because somehow she is pregnant. And you know what? That's probably one of the more tame parts of the episode. Where I left was when the male MC gets captured and the first remark the captor makes is, and I'm like, I can handle horny anime, but then something about Conception just sent a shiver down my spine. But I mean, shout out to the director, Keitaro Motonaga, for directing the Digimon Adventure Tri movies, School Days, Katanagatari, and a few other shows. I haven't seen most of those, but if I'm cursed to know that knowledge, you are too. How do you pivot from conception? Like I'm trying to make this flow together better and like lead into the next thing, but I'm here like, oh yeah, you know what series existed before the Scourge of Disconception? The Silver Guardian. While working through these episodes, I hit points where I try to just truck on through shows by looking for shorter ones. For some reason, The Silver Guardian is a short anime. The key visual looked kind of cool, so I hoped the action or something would cleanse my brain from the conception plague. But unfortunately, it really didn't. It just kind of came and went from my mind even quicker than its shorter runtime. It could have really used those extra few minutes of runtime, even if I imagine it probably just couldn't get them. It just felt like it never got started, and then voila, the episode is over. But it's also just another the gamer has to save the world kind of isekai, but this time he has crossed. But once I finished this, I took a break from my session to clear conception out of my mind, because that's what any sane human being should do. I began my next watching session with Fushiki Yugi, an older isekai that shows its age but also kind of ruled. It felt like a breath of fresh air for a couple of reasons, mainly because Yuki is a fun protagonist and also isn't overpowered. It's not a high bar to clear, but I do like it when you don't have an overpowered protagonist because it is just overdone at this point. But also, she's not the strongest, but she still has some agency, like when she decides she's just gonna suplex a guy. And there's also the setting, which feels distinct, which is probably because it's older and they still had some unique fantasy world designs and not the same circle town design used in like half the isekai nowadays. It looks like a proper fantasy world and not a video game fantasy world. Which, you know, maybe that's where modern isekai started to stumble. They stopped borrowing from more pure fantasy and original ideas and took from video game worlds. But also, like, why couldn't you take inspiration from something like Chrono Trigger, like Xenoblade Chronicles, or like Final Fantasy VII? I would kill for an isekai with landmarks as distinct as Xenoblade Chronicles 1. I may be totally off base on that assumption. I'm kind of just making it up. But I did find a blog post from Iclone where they looked at isekai towns and talked about how these fantasy worlds can make these like perfect towns for the story because they're fantasy, which makes sense because you don't have stubborn people who have 20 acres of land and refuse to give it up when they try to do town improvement or redevelopment. Ultimately, you can make a fictional town serve its purpose perfectly to do exactly what you need it to do visually and also as a town. But I still wish they looked a little more visually distinct. And if I have to give Android credit at all, it isn't the most dull setting, is what I would say, but like it's kind of true, even if only like a little bit. I've heard nothing about Android that is remotely good. I've heard the art's bad, the story's bad. But while it has an overpowered protagonist, at least in the first episode, it's just a revenge story. I didn't hate it as much as I figure I would, but I also imagine if I continue on, that opinion is going to go right out the window. Granted, I also have no desire to continue it either way, because even if it has a somewhat distinct premise, it's still horribly uninteresting. So much of the episode is spent on the oblivious, like, what do you mean I'm in a fantasy world? What is this, some kind of isekai? Which, in fairness, is a valid reaction, but listen, I've watched like 20 of these things already. Get to the point. But in contrast, the ambition of Oda Nobuna does a similar thing where it gets to the point, but instead it's just...
It's like one of my Japanese animes.
Our protagonist has played a lot of Nobunaga's ambition and is going through the world spoiling the story in real time. But I hate to break it to him, there's already a better version of Japanese history with a female Oda Nobunaga, and that's Fate Grand Order. It's just a better game, better story, better art. And then you have Astaroth's Toy, which tries to steal a separate FGO servant's design, except they try to make Ereshkigal look like a 6-year-old child, who is also a succubus and hates men. Astaroth's Toy falls into another one of the like 3 isekai series where I just couldn't finish it because I just don't know how to stomach it. So basically, Astaroth's aide yoinks Naoya, a single father with a child, from said child to be in Astaroth's harem, since he maybe can make her like men, or at least draw the blood needed because she's a succubus. And immediately after, the vibes are just rancid because Astaroth looks and acts like she's 12-year-old at best. Meanwhile, Naoya is an adult with a child, and he was abducted from that child without his consent. In its defense, it's an ecchi series, so I'm expecting some horny and some weird, but I don't care if she's 1,000 years old. That looks like a criminal age gap to me. And also, you abducted a man from his child. That's a crime. And also, I don't like that at all. Errata the Legend got better once I learned it was by the director of Macross Delta, an anime that you legally can't watch anywhere, but you all should watch. In Arata's defense, though, it does have a fairly interesting plot. Arata gets switched from being bullied in school to a fantasy world where the princess is assassinated and all the aides are trying to kill him. He may have just the most boring design that would absolutely fail the silhouette test, but he's carried by a interesting plot and a director who made one other show that I happen to like. And speaking of directors I happen to like, Majin Bone was directed by the director of early One Piece, but it's a card game anime, so they balance out. Majin Bone bears more with Super Sentai shows, but it's one of the few reverse isekai shows I watched where my brain is so programmed to see fantasy worlds where when they're going to Japan, I'm like, wait, this is still an isekai. They're coming from another world because isekai is just being transported to a different one. So if you're from like the Majin Bone universe, modern day Japan is a different world technically. The show itself isn't anything crazy at all, but it's also like 50 episodes, so that's to be expected. And it's also a card game anime, so that will do it as it wants to do, and we'll probably get like 8 million seasons. It's not the traditional like Yu-Gi-Oh kind of card game. It's more like Luck and Logic, where the cards are integrated into the story in the world, and not like actual cards like you're watching Yu-Gi-Oh. But somehow while watching these, I managed to get 2 reverse isekais back to back because I watched Sengoku Collection. Although, if it's set in Sengoku era Japan, is it really an isekai if they've just moved forward in time? Because it's not a different world, they just fast forwarded a bit. Anyways, Sengoku Collection is historical Japanese figures, except in the present, who can't go back to war without being reunited in modern day Japan. Woe is me. Such a tragic thing. No more war. But in the meantime, you get a very standard, vaguely horny anime where you've got your flustered male get aroused by Oda Nobunaga being naked in his house, and I'm sure you can figure out the rest of the antics that ensue. It does have some vaguely good character designs, but some of them don't really feel like they'd fit in a Japan of the Sengoku era, and instead feel like a cosplay outfit for a non-distinct character. And now we reach the end of all the anime Crunchyroll classifies as fantasy isekai, their easiest way to find isekai, aside from there being so many that you just stumble across one any given time at the top of the website because there's always like 6 airing. I ended off with NG Night Lamune, another older isekai, because if I'm being honest, my gauge of how good an isekai is an older one is probably better, and unfortunately Lamune was the first to kind of prove that wrong. It's not bad per se, it has mechs in a very traditional RPG video game world, but it's also just kind of there. It didn't really leave a lasting impression on me besides having a joke about a door being a pull instead of a push, which I don't think I've seen in like a decade. But as the end of Crunchyroll's curated fantasy isekai, it was a bit of a whimper to end on. Now that I've finished the curated isekai from Crunchyroll, I wanted to take a second to reflect on its offerings independent of the new ones I watched. I genuinely really like Reincarnated as a Slime, SAO, ReZero, but on the whole, many of the isekai are just kind of fine. It's a wide selection of shows and eras, even if only for shows like Kiklos and Fushiki Yugi. But it does have big, we made this list once and have not updated it since energy, which if you go with it being that there are so many isekai, oh man, I can't update the list, it's too many. I'm like, that's fair, but also, you're a massive company. You definitely can do that. I maybe will make a better one. Don't quote me on that. If I'm feeling really gung ho after releasing this video, I'll make a list of all the good isekai that have my approval from just the first episode. But probably I'm not going to do that because then I would have to like actually watch a lot of these shows, and don't really want to. I briefly considered making a. I finished all these isekai for just this fantasy one, and then I remembered I'd have to finish Conception, and I went, no, I'm not going to do that. That's a bad idea. But if I had to pick from their curated list, I would just say watch SAO, Reincarnated as a Slime, ReZero, Konosuba, even though I don't like it like people do. Probably Ascendance of a Bookworm, Grimgar, Fushiki Yugi for like your classic one, and then like Shield Hero or Overlord, depending on your kind of fancy thing. But now we get into all the shows that I had to find on my own from just scrolling down Crunchyroll's alphabetical list and going, that looks like an isekai.
あ、そう。
なんでかな
I started this next leg with Sweet Reincarnation, which wasn't particularly interesting, but that was only partially its fault. I did a lot of episodes for this project on my phone, lazing about because my computer setup gets cold in the winter. However, in this case, I had the episode on while I was watching my virtual graduation from grad school, because in the midst of working a full-time job and putting out weekly videos, I got a master's degree in creative writing. And my name came up during the episode, so I just let it play, but by that point, I had already known how I would sum up this show. Anyway, if a company wants to hire me, please do. But speaking of things I'd love to have in my life,
あまり無茶しないでくださいね。
え
ヨーダさん、無茶しますから。この部屋を借りた時もすごく疲れた顔してたし。
listen, I'm not saying I liked my unique skill makes me OP even at level 1 because of Emily being a pure beacon of joy that made me feel like, God, I wish that were me. But it's definitely like 90% of the reason. Because as I said in my notes, men only want one thing, and it's to be loved and appreciated. And I was based for that one. But the other thing men want to be is allowed to cook. Which in hindsight, I probably should have watched this next show after Sweet Reincarnation, because then I could have used that transition there when it was probably better. But anyway, Campfire Cooking Another World with my absurd skill fits into the category of isekais I generally like more, which is the ones that are pretty low stakes. I don't care about demon lords, I don't care about beating them, I just want to chill and relax while in the fantasy world. Don't get me wrong, I can still get invested in the more traditional isekais, but I feel like they do less unique things when it's propped up against the ones where it's just like, I got reincarnated, but I have one very specific skill that lets me relax in a fantasy world. And not overpowered guy number 1,000 going, I gotta go kill the demon lord. So Campfire Cooking gets by on being fine, but why Raeliana ended up at the Duke's Mansion gets the award for the most unexpectedly great isekai premiere. I think part of my affection for Raeliana was that it felt so fresh compared to all the sameness of the other isekais I'd been watching. But the drama and craftiness of Raeliana, just the first episode was great. She's also trying not to die, but she's doing it by just throwing a wrench in everything, and I immensely respect that. I respect a woman of action, even if I imagine this could go down the more traditional romance route later on. But none of that sounds bad, unlike the brother in the Reincarnation of the Strongest Exorcist in Another World. God, these names are so long. I'm not sure if Reincarnation of the Strongest Exorcist has the most wasted pre-isekai world, but it is amazing how they have this already magical world where the MC is doing 6 spells against spirits, and then we transition into generic isekai number 632 with one of the most infuriating older brothers. So we have Seika, the main character, has an older brother, Gray, who is just the most insufferable person alive. He's basically constantly bullying Seika, and they're like, you're trash because you have no magic power, and I have more than you. It's like, you're 6 years old, buddy. Like, grow up. But then Seiko pulls up with his magic spirit magic and is like, sit down, boy. But in a nice way. He's not going to do that because that would stir too many fires. It was nice, though. It was nice to humble him. Not quite the way I wanted, but at least it made it very clear that this guy is much stronger than you. He is just being humble about it. And another series that's very self-evident is Harem in the Labyrinth of Another World. I don't feel like I need to say more here, nor do I really want to. It's a harem in a labyrinth of another world. What do you know? But I will, because guess what, everybody? The main character has what's probably a slavery fetish. I hate that I said that sentence. And guess what he can make money in the dungeon to do? Buy more slave girls. That's not a harem, my guy. That's a crime in most places of the world. While writing this script, I'm having such a great time being reminded of series that had exited my mind, and it was better they stayed that way. But now I have to unearth them to tell you that the harem isekai show with slavery in it isn't that good. Anyways, I got a cheat skill in Another World and became unrivaled in the real world too. Isn't that good either, but I imagine it's peak male fantasy for the demographic of high school loner boys out there who are getting bullied and generally undesirable to other people. And the solution is just find a magic door to an isekai world where you can get jacked so all the kids in high school like you more because all of a sudden you're ripped and can like kill a person by touching them. But also it says something that I can't tell if this is one of like 4 different series. And I don't mean that in like a ha ha ha, all isekai are the same. I mean like I genuinely do not feel 100% sure this is the one I'm talking about, or if I'm thinking of a different show. Fortunately for the world's finest assassin gets reincarnated in another world as an aristocrat, I can tell it apart from the other reincarnated as an aristocrat isekai we'll get to, even if it's only because it has a pretty good opening. In all seriousness, I had a lot of fun with this episode, even if it's all pre-isekai, because between the wild pre-isekai mission and killing some slave traders, that's 2 points in its favor. And then they add the caveat of being like, you need to kill the hero, and I'm like, hell yeah, brother, let's go. It's also just nice to see that one of the good isekai anime openings isn't wasted on a bad show. But unfortunately for me, this was the end of the good anime I'd watch in this next batch. I forgot everything about Fruit of Evolution, but you know we're in for a good time when my first note is, I wish my eyes would roll into the back of my head. This is all the worst tropes at once. And honestly, that's a pretty apt summary of the show. When I mentioned cheat skill earlier, that I couldn't be sure if I was remembering the right show, this is one of the other shows. The process is the same, except cheat skill leaned incredibly hard into like the edginess and making sure the audience knew that this protagonist's life was just the absolute worst before he got to go to the other world and get jacked. And Fruit of Evolution doesn't have that. And unfortunately, the next show didn't get any better. My one-hit kill sister has nothing going for it. The protagonist is pointing at every single reference going, it's just like that video game. Like, damn, dude, it's almost like that's the premise for half of the isekai shows that exist. Shut up. And if he isn't annoying enough, he is such a gamer that he has to call someone else to help him. And somehow they managed to find an even more annoying character to bring along. The aforementioned one-hit kill sister is uncomfortably obsessed with her brother to the point where she almost took her own existence from the earth to join him in the isekai world. But it's okay, she's in a coma, actually. But either way, I have genuinely no words for how dumb that is. Every second she's on screen shakes my being in discomfort. But of course, because this is a male fantasy show, she doesn't get any credit for being overpowered and killing all the big monsters. They're like, wow, brother, you did so good. And the guy's like, you can't, sister, man, don't do that. You can't get credit for that. It's my job. Like, you've already got 2 of the most annoying characters, and now you're adding sexism in the workplace? Come on, guys. We're better than that. But after 2 bad shows in a row, I cut my losses and I called it good for a day and went on to go do literally anything else. I'll probably play Fortnite.
Full Metal Alchemist. Full Metal Alchemist.
After watching enough of these isekai anime, I had the brilliant idea to work on an Isekai first episode bingo. Partially because after a point, several of my notes ended up just being some variant of course there's this trope I've seen in 10 shows now, so I compiled a bunch of them into a bingo card, because why not? Got things like having a magic aptitude test, having to keep their overpowered skills a secret, dying of overwork, being transported to another world, having all of their overpowered magic powers immediately. You get the point. After a point, it becomes funny to see just how many follow the exact same concepts or use the exact same methods with their slight twist in how it's delivered. A good example of this is the magic aptitude test, where it's the most used trope, probably. It's used a lot, but it's also implemented differently in like every single isekai, where sometimes it's like a magic orb, or a magic scroll, or even a magic book. I know, riveting distinctions. Functionally, they're all doing the exact same thing, but it's fascinating to see how you change it up, because you can't just copy from a different series. That would be plagiarism. You have to change it so it's a magic book instead of magic scroll. It's the same idea with the magic systems, where basically all of them use elemental magic, but how they cast the spell changes or how they manifest it changes. A lot look very similar, but some have the spell just be shouting fireball and a fireball appears, while some make a whole ordeal out of chanting and all that fun stuff. And then, of course, some just immediately cast the OP skill because why not? Basically, my point is that you can say all Isekai anime are the same, but they aren't. They may look similar and follow very, very similar premises and plot lines, but there are differences you can find. And after watching so many, my gaze shifted from, another magic aptitude test to, oh, they use a magic book this time instead of a magic orb. That's kind of neat. It's a little thing, but ultimately that's what makes it a little easier to trudge through so many of the same thing. Anyway, let's get back to the Isekai shows now. Now let's talk about Japanese work culture, a subject I am incredibly unqualified to talk about, but I'm gonna anyways. All I know is that it's taken a lot of lives of people who end up being reincarnated in isekai worlds. I Will Survive Using Potions is another entry in that catalog, except this time before going to our new world, our protagonist Kaoru actually gets to say goodbye to her loved ones instead of being whisked away by Truck-kun. I actually really like this idea because it is just a good way to put everything in context, where 99% of the time they just are insta-transported, and it's like, yeah, they left the family behind. So instead, you get to have those final moments to be like, see you guys, I'm off to go to a fantasy world. Which, in hindsight, Karu's family is very accepting of, but, like, what else are you gonna do? But it's an interesting thing, and that's all that really matters. And I Will Survive Using Potions is a pretty engaging isekai in that it does some interesting things. Mainly, it's just that the protagonist is pretty conniving in a way, but she's also very realistic about the situation she's been put in. He's like, yeah, I'm not trying to die, like, give me an OP skill and, like, let me make it work. And in fairness, even if she's OP, she's doing it with potions and is like, well, I need the potions and I need the box to store the potions and I need this, this, and this. It's very logical, and I like that. There's still magic and stuff, but the introduction and the powers Korra gets make sense and aren't super OP. And also she's using them for good, which is nice. Everything kind of lines up, and you're like, yep, this is going to be a chill time. Which is not what I could say for Summon to Another World for a second time, a isekai that just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Summon for a second time suffered partially because it is bad, and also because I watched it right after watching a free run episode, where Summon for a second time goes with the premise of the MC having already done the isekai once. He's been there, done that. But then he is suddenly whisked away to the same isekai world he has already defeated. And the first episode tries to harness that, like, nostalgia where everyone's like, oh, it's you, look, so glad you're back. And then one is like, I am now a human horse for you, or human chair. And I'm like, well, if I cared any bit, which I didn't, I now definitely don't care. Because the problem is that everyone's like, oh, I missed you so much, or oh, I'm so glad you're back. And I don't know who these people are. I have no affection towards them. There has been nothing built to make me care. Where Freerun does it because it gives us that first episode to get us invested and ties it in nicely throughout the rest of the story. Whereas someone for a second time just brings up a past that we have not seen and expects us to care as much. So in fairness, maybe the series could be decent if they just dropped the second time part and then introduced us to them as if we didn't know them. It probably still wouldn't be good, but it would probably be a little less bad. But anyways, let's go to a show I actually enjoyed. Arifureta from Commonplace to World's Strongest is just the edgiest show, but it is edgy in the way that it circles around to being funny again. It had a bit of legwork done for it by having one of, if not my favorite, Isekai anime opening, but it was also just a fun episode. It's kind of like another series, Berserk of Gluttony, except it's a lot less bad and there's a lot less abuse in it. But the actual experience of watching the episode was watching me get on board with it in real time. It starts off, it's kind of generic. I'm like, this isn't hooking me. And then our boy Nagumo gets trapped in hell with all the scary monsters trying to kill him, and he decides to be a freak about it. And it just becomes the king of edginess. He eats the turn your hair white monster that makes him stronger and cooler and everything. And then all of a sudden he's just this edgy white-haired killer with guns and grenades and all of that in a fantasy world. Most of which I genuinely don't know how he got, but I don't care because it's really funny. Which is what I could say about Kimono Michi, but I'm not. It wasn't actually that funny. I lied. Honestly, a pro wrestler who loves animals being isekai'd could be a pretty funny idea, but it isn't when the animal lover is really weird about it. I'm glad he loves all animals, every kind, including like the isekai animals, but when there's an extended scene of him like rapidly petting the like wolf people and them very clearly being implied to be like getting off to it, I guess is the best way to put it, then I'm like, I'm gonna head out now. This is kind of weird. I have to get it credit at least because it's distinct. There aren't too many other isekai like it, but that's not always a good thing, and it definitely is not here. But I have to give another series, Aristocrats Otherworldly Adventure, no credit at all because it is not distinct either. It's just boring. But before I talk about the show directly, I want to go on a little bit of an aside that's starting to get on my nerves a bit, which is that so many isekai do the whole you've been reincarnated as a baby, which is like, yeah, sure, whatever. But then by the end of the episode, they're like 16 and off to high school. And at that point, I'm like, why did you bother with the baby stuff? Why not just make them a high schooler if you're going to basically zoom through it in like 20 minutes? I get it's kind of supposed to give them like the practice and the development to like be good at it, but like I don't care. Like get on with it, buddy. When it's an adult in a baby's body, it is always a little bit weird to me. You can just start them as a teenager. It's okay. I don't think too many people will be too upset. But it's also just that whenever they're a baby, the jokes are like really weird, mainly because it's like, well, this could be funny if it wasn't like a 30-year-old middle-aged man in that body and not an actual baby. But yeah, Aristocrats Otherworldly Adventure is a whole lot of nothing. It just checks all the boxes. He's overpowered, he has max stats, he has to hide his magic powers. You get the point. I've said it probably like 20 times already. Just a whole lot of mid, and it does nothing special or really even worth noting. Skeleton Knight in the Other World, on the other hand, unfortunately does have a memorable moment, but not in a good way. It begins with women being assaulted, and it genuinely killed any chance of me enjoying this series, or this episode at all. I get the whole where, like, you have to show a bad thing to make them the hero of the world, but, like, what if you don't do it with that specific way? They could be being attacked like a normal fantasy RPG and not being assaulted, you know? There's better ways to do that I would have loved if you had taken. But then you go beyond that, and it's just the same plot line as every other isekai. Shout out to Pelage for getting his own anime opening. That's pretty cool. The only other cool thing was the teleportation spell is like when you click a mouse to move, and that's kind of neat. But like, those are two small things and a thing that I just don't care about and definitely could not. And unfortunately, for a similar series, Parallel World Pharmacy was also just pretty boring. As I've said countless times by now, my biggest gripe with Isekai is they have these cool premises, but just do not handle introducing them well at all. An Isekai where he's making drugs to help people is a neat concept, but then we spend like half the episode doing raw exposition, and I'm like, buddy, I don't care. It is another dying of overwork Isekai, which starting to get a little sad. Like Japan, you gotta fix that. That's not. There shouldn't be this many that are that. But beyond that, Parallel World Pharmacy is it's just there. It's chill, but not enough for me to really want to watch more of it. Meanwhile, saving 80,000 gold in another world for my retirement was pretty chill, and I'd actually consider watching more. Saving 80k gold won me over by having a rare intro where there's an actual language barrier between characters. Granted, it's done away by the end of the episode, but it was a large part of the episode, which is neat to see that there's still some communication across the barrier, and also that it seems like it's going to be pretty chill either way. The family that rescues Mitsuha, the protagonist, seemed like really good people, and that always helps for a comfy show. And also, there's no demon lord, which is great. We love to see it. The only thing that's happening in this world is some good old-fashioned capitalism. Because, I mean, you got fantasy goals worth so much, who wouldn't use that to retire early? The last show before we enter the home stretch is Other Side Picnic, a show directed by the director of Steins Gate that I thought would be wildly different based on the name. But instead it's this horror anime where we go to these different worlds and meet what are probably like creepypasta monsters in some way, but in like anime form. It had this really engaging world where I'm genuinely intrigued as to like where it will go, especially considering the show's called Other Side Picnic, and it seems like the other side is not a picnic, considering they've almost died like every time they went in. It also had like an indie horror video game vibe, but apparently it's based on a novel, so like what do I know? But it definitely is one of the better episodes. But now we're into the home stretch. The final stretch of Isekai anime begins with By the Grace of the Gods, another entry into the overworked to death Isekai. So this time our MC has a lot of slimes doing basically everything for him. But these aren't slimes that are like cute, they're kind of like what you would think a slime would be if they weren't meant to be cute. They're kind of these little ugly little freaks. I like them a little cuter, just personally. But their other problem is that they fall victim to needing a metric ton of exposition because we obviously need to see how these slimes help with his daily life and chores, obviously. And then it makes the choice to go backwards to go give us the how he got into the Sky World, which is just a pretty typical one. As much as saving the how you got isekai'd for the latter half of the episode, it kind of just abruptly stops any momentum we've got going for something that like isn't going to be that interesting. And I'd honestly just rather you continue on with the isekai stuff than like doubling back and doing nothing of value. But instead of doubling back, Cautious Hero, the hero is overpowered but overly cautious, decides it wants to double down on the same bit for the entire first episode. Honestly, who could have guessed the cautious hero spends the whole first episode barely in the isekai world and instead functionally in a hyperbolic time chamber? Which, unfortunately, is only half the problem with cautious hero. The overly cautious bit really isn't that funny, but Restarte, the goddess who has summoned our cautious hero, also just feels like Aqua from Konosuba, but without any of the other cast dynamic of Konosuba. That kind of lessens her impact a little bit. All of that is to say, I find her incredibly grating, even more so than Aqua, which I didn't think was possible. But if you find the cautious hero bit funny, then I imagine you can get through this show. But I was over it like the second time they ran it down mid. But speaking of shows that if you find the bit funny, you will get a lot out of it, let's talk about Do You Love Your Mother and Her Two-Hit Multi-Target Attacks. I will give this series credit for giving you exactly what you signed up for. All those MILF lovers out there are going to love this. I'm not that guy. Not that guy, pal. I find their dynamic a bit off-putting, but the entire time I'm there like, yeah, I'm not who this show is supposed to be for. So I'm just going to walk away, let the MILF lovers have that one. Good for you guys. Happy you are eating whatever it is. And I'm going to talk about I've been killing slimes for 300 years and maxed out my level, which is a series for me. I love just the most chill isekais, even if basically all of them are the result of overworked people dying. I don't need the stakes of a demon lord. I'm just here to chill and live life. Killing slimes remind me a lot of Leodale, where she's overpowered, but in a chill way, so I don't really care. And she also doesn't let people overwork themselves, and she's based for that one. We do love a protagonist advocating for a healthy work-life balance. Anyways, fellas, question for you. Is it gay to be attracted to your boy who got transported to another world but is now a woman? Life with an ordinary guy who reincarnated into a total fantasy knockout aims to answer that question. I don't think anyone was asking it besides the boys when they're like 12 beers deep, but glad to know an answer exists. And like several of the series we've talked about, your mileage on the comedy here may vary. And it didn't really work for me. I just wanted them to get in the romance. Stop running the same bit down mid where it's like, nah, I can't show I'm attracted to my homie. That's not cool. And I'm like, buddy, it's 2024. People do that every day. That's just how things are. But now we got to rewind time to when that wasn't the thing. To a classic in the isekai genre, mainly for an iconic opening. I'm talking about Restaurant in Another World, one I was eagerly awaiting, and it delivered in every way. But also because I'm fully aware of what I'm getting into. It's a normal chef cooking for isekai folk, and that's all I need. The OP can carry me too. But also, a point in this one's favor is that it is a cooking isekai, and half of it isn't a live-action cooking segment. Save that for the cookbooks, which, in fairness, is not a high bar to clear. There's a very specific niche here, which was that isekai izekaya. But it's there, so it's one nonetheless. But as I've said, if it's a chill isekai, I probably like it. And Restaurant Otherworld definitely fits that bill. And on the entirely opposite side of that spectrum, we have Kamikatsu, working for God in a godless world. It is not chill, but I also genuinely don't think I can describe to you anything about this show. I'd seen screenshots on Twitter and it was just like the most bizarre thing, but it still did not prepare me for what I was about to watch. It's somehow the horniest show that isn't Concession, but our MC gets jerked off to be brought back to life. Every character we interact with is just the horniest person alive for their very specific thing, which as it turns out is why they're all together, because apparently they're in what is functionally a concentration camp for horny people. But it's also where the government can tell you to die and then you just do. And take that idea and then pivot it right into bondage stuff. I don't know how that happened either, but somehow they did it. The biggest appeal of Kamikatsu is reveling in the fact that it has no desire to be consistent. It doesn't care what you think. It is just a truly special show. It's one you watch with the boys and you are just laughing because you're like, how did they do that? Why? What? You just have no words. Whether that's good or bad is up for you to decide. I think it's funny. And lastly, which is what I would say if I hadn't actually missed a bunch of them, because I don't know how to read, and also there's like 60 things on here, so naturally a couple slipped through the cracks. You watch Magical Knight Rayearth, another old isekai based on a Clamp story with a lot of positives. Granted, being a Clamp story in general is already a pretty big positive. The characters' designs in this are just so cool. The villain is like a Yu-Gi-Oh card character, and I mean that in like the best way possible. The actual plot isn't the most interesting, but every time I just look at the character designs and I'm like, wow. They don't make them like they used to. But basically, it's just that they have visually distinct designs that, like, most of them would pass the silhouette test. And there are no isekai protagonists passing the silhouette test. I hate to break it to you. None of those guys have distinct designs in any way, shape, or form. But now we actually enter the final arc of this arc. With 4 series that I caught, slipped through the cracks. I probably missed a few more, but these are all the ones on my list that I'm not going to keep updating. I can see that it is winter 2024. I'm not watching any more of those. I want to watch Lucky Star and the like 4 other anime I stopped watching to do this. Once I sit down for the last session, I see everything beginning, and I'm instead watching Handymancido in Another World. Another chill isekai that surprisingly is barely about like the life pre-isekai. It's like 30 seconds where it is pretty clear he probably died of overwork, but he wasn't having a great time doing their job either way. But like, I don't care. I'm glad. Most of it's just these little vignettes where they're just chilling in the dungeon, having a fun time. It's not like the most crazy or most fun, but like, I'll put that guy in the backlog for the comfy isekai when I'm bored and just want to put something on the background. And then on the complete opposite side of things, yet again, we have Trapped in a Dating Sim, which is an otome game isekai, not a villainess one, because it starts with a gamer, in the derogatory sense, playing an otome game because his sister blackmailed him into it. The implication is exactly what you think it is. So for the first half of the episode, you're watching this guy who like feels vaguely incel, like almost getting a little misogynistic there, do like a reaction stream to a bad video game. But then we enter the game and it becomes much more enjoyable when it's just this dumb video game world with a kind of traditional villainess type vibe that all of a sudden has like sci-fi in it, because why not? It reminded me a bit of Utuare Mono, where all of a sudden there's this sci-fi aspect to it. But in contrast, our boy isn't overpowered. He's just trying to live a decent life. And somehow I was enjoying myself by the end. Not like a crazy amount, like temper your expectations here. But I'm glad it leaned into the silly nature of the world instead of feeling like I was waiting for someone to start saying slurs. But speaking of sci-fi isekai, let's turn to Knights and Magic. One of my favorite isekai tropes is when they have these super intricate magic systems and we still end up with guns being made. There's just something so funny to me when it's like, why use magic sticks when I can just have a gun to shoot magic out of? And also, Knights and Magic has mechs, which makes it even better. Cool looking mechs will win me over. It's not that hard. Not that much is required to make me invested, and I have seen like one other isekai with mechs, so bring on all of them. But one thing that did surprise me was that more series haven't made a magic system based on like coding. Like a lot of the jobs that I'm assuming they're dying of overwork are like in the vein of coding or have some element to it. But it seems like Knights Magic has a pretty complex one that like you can basically code the coolest robot. Granted, I'm saying all of this, but having a system like that requires actual effort and thought put into a magic system beyond just elemental magic, and we all know that's not going to happen. But the whole show is hyperfixated on making the coolest mech, and me too. That is enough for me to want to watch more. And finally, without further ado, let us get into the actual final isekai I'm watching. A classic of the genre that recently had a collab with McDonald's. Talking about The Devil is a Part-Timer. One of the quintessential anime in the isekai genre for me. And it delivered on that by being an isekai where the characters actually have to work. They are not overpowered, and that is great. Which I think partially is a product of it being a reverse isekai, because like they don't really have powers in modern day in Japan. I mean, they kind of do, but like they're very weak apparently. But it is nice to have the devil just working at McDonald's, being like worrying about his finances. Like that's funny. And so far, there's no like typical romance or like weirdly horny guys all the time. It's just that guy at work who is acting too nice at his job, especially considering it's a fake McDonald's. Like I know you are not enjoying that job. You should not be doing that. Find a good one. But it also had a language barrier, which is pretty sick. I do love a good language barrier factor in the first episode. Because it's a nice little change where it's like, oh no, I'm super strong and I have to hide everything. Where instead it's like, oh, I just can't talk to you. Which also like makes sense when you get transported, because it's like you are in two very different things. Like, you shouldn't just be immediately able to communicate, even if like it is all done by the end of the episode and we're fine with it again. Like, it's kind of what I expect at this point. But all in all, it is a much more fitting end to this isekai project, ending it with a classic of the genre. And with that, we are at the end of the journey. Almost 70 episodes of anime, basically an entire day of anime episodes. And what did we learn from this adventure? I learned to never subject myself to watching things I don't want to. I don't understand how people can do these videos where it's like you spend 4 to 5 hours playing a really bad game, if not more. Like, we are on this earth for such a short time. Why are you spending 20 hours playing a bad game when you could spend 20 hours playing a good game that you enjoy? And in fairness, I kind of just finished it because I was like, man, I gotta finish this. I'm halfway through. I'm in too deep. And also because I saw Giga making so many videos where he's like, Isekai are kind of good. And I'm like, I'll give it a shot. I will not be watching any more Isekai after this unless it looks genuinely good. I am more inclined to give them a shot, I guess would be the biggest gain from this adventure. But I also am fully aware that I probably will not watch many of them because they all just don't look that great. I think the big change here was that I used to be very averse to isekai anime, like a normal person and like most people, where you see the same thing 8 million times and you're like, that doesn't look good. It also looks like the last 4 ones we talked about. But not all of them were that bad. Some of them were kind of good. Only like 3 or 4 were truly terrible, but a lot of them were very boring. I'll give them that. Most of them enter and exit my mind, and I don't think I will think about them for the rest of my life. The only thing that got bigger from this list is my dropped list on my anime list. But, oh well. Sometimes you got a little spontaneity in your life. So what's next after this? One big project's done. I have no idea. I don't have too many long-term projects on the horizon. I'll probably think of one. But after this, I'm like, I don't want to do any more of these watch every type of anime in this thing made. Unless it's like shows I'm actually interested in. But like, I'm good watching isekai anime for a while. However, I did watch all of them. And you know what that means. We got to do a YouTube classic. The Isekai anime first episode tier list, baby. Let's go.